By the end of the order of the way the mitzvahs are done on the night of Pesach, on the night of the 15th, after describing and speaking about the fourth cup, the Rambam says, V'yesh loy limzoi kois chamishi, and we're soon going to see what the words v'yesh loy means. That's part of the discussion now. Our Sicha is going to be about what v'yesh loy means. Does it mean he can pour another cup? Does it mean he should pour another cup, a fifth cup? V'loymar Allah, and on it he says, Halel HaGadol. Halel HaGadol is the capital Tehillim that starts with Hoidu LaHashem ki toiv ki lo olam chazdoi, going till the capital of Al-Nar is Bavel, so it was 26 ki lo olam chazdois. And this koi, says the Rambam, is not an obligation like the other four cups. Says the Rebbe, the source for this fifth cup is in the Beraisa, according to the Girsa of the Go'onim, which says, Chamishi, the fifth cup, Oimer olav Halel HaGadol, we say Halel HaGadol over it. These are the words of Reb Tarfon. So the Rabbeinu Monoyach comments on the Rambam that there seems to be implying that you're actually not allowed to drink wine after the four cups. Because if you would think that you could drink wine, then why do we make the person say Halal HaGadol on it? That's a proof that you shouldn't be drinking. But if you want to drink, then on that cup, that extra cup, you're going to be needing to say the Halal HaGadol. Just like on the fourth cup we say inyanim like that. So things similar to Halel and Yitzias Mitzrayim. Otherwise it would be usher to drink. So from the words of Rabbeinu Monoyach, it's understood that he learns the words of the Rambam about the Kois Chamishi, that it's an optional thing. V'yesh loy limzoig means you're allowed to pour another cup. If you want to drink, then you're going to need to say on it Halel HaGadol. This is similar to the shita of a number of Go'onim, that this Kois Chamishi, this fifth cup, is completely optional. It's up to you if you want to drink another cup. However, says the Rebbe, this Pirush is seemingly not so smooth in the words of the Rambam. Because the Rambam concludes, as said before, the Kois Zeh, this Kois is not an obligation, K'moy arba Kois, it's like the four cups. If we should say that according to the Rambam, the fifth cup is totally not an obligation in any sense whatsoever, the Rambam should have said briefly, Bekitzer, he should have said, the Kois Zeh, this Kois is not a chayva. From the arichos of the words of the Rambam, it seems that the fifth cup does have some aspect of an obligation to it. It's just not as much as an obligation, k'moy arba koises, like the other four cups. In other words, it's not as much a chayva like the four cups, but it's some chayva there is. And the Rebbe says this is also the way it seems from the Ran in Masechta Pesachim, what he says about the Rambam. Because the Ran is discussing the words of Reb Tarfon. So the way the Ran explains what Reb Tarfon says about the fifth cup, so the Ran says the first four cups are an obligation. The fifth cup is a reshus, it's optional. If you want to drink it, then you say Halal HaGadol. That's one way how the Ran explains it. Then the Rambam says, Inami, another way of explaining it is, that it's actually mitzvah min al-mufchar, it's best to actually drink a fifth cup. And to say on it Halal HaGadol. And that's the wording that the Reb Tarfon says, Oimer olav Halal HaGadol. And then the Ran says, and this is also the way the Rambam's words are leaning in this direction, in the last perek of Hilchas Chametz U'Matzah. In other words, he's learning that the opinion of the Rambam is that the Kois Chamishi is mitzvah min ha-mufchar. And therefore the Rambam says, the Kois Zeh, this Kois is not a chayva like the four cups, which is that even though yesh loy limzog, the Rambam's words are, which now we're translating is that it's best to pour another cup. Nevertheless, it's not an obligation like the first four cups. But the Rebbe says this Pirush seems also not to be completely smooth in the words of the Rambam. Because according to this, the Rambam should have written clearly, as is common in the Rambam's language in a number of places, he should have said, mitzvah min ha-mufchar, to pour another cup, to say the fifth cup, and to say Halal HaGadol, or some sort of similar expression to that. From the wording of the Rambam, it seems that yes, there is an obligation, but you can't call it a mitzvah or even a mitzvah min ha-mufchar. And therefore the Rambam says, V'yesh loy limzoig. You should pour, but he doesn't apply any expression of mitzvah or mitzvah ma'amufcher to it, and so on. So how do we understand the Rambam? Says the Rebbe, we're going to understand this by first looking a little bit more carefully into the wording of the Rambam. In regards to the first 4 kaises, the Rambam paskins, each one of the 4 cups, you need to say a separate bracha for it. And he brings also what you need to say in association with each one of the 4 cups. Later on, says the Rebbe, when the Rambam is actually discussing the whole order of the mitzvahs the way they are done on the night of the 15th, he specifies by each cup, he mentions that you drink the cup. By the first kais, he says, Mavarech Bayir Pri Hagafen, you make a hagafen and you say Kiddush on this cup, and Shecheyanu, and you drink it. By the second kais, he says, you say a Bayir Pri Hagafen and you drink the second cup. By the third cup, Mavarech Birchas Hamazon, you say Birchas Hamazon on the third cup and you drink it. And then by the fourth cup, he says you make a Bayir Pri Hagafen and you don't taste anything after that at all. In other words, you don't have anything to eat or drink after that at all. When it comes, however, to the kois chamishi, to the 5th cup, the Rambam only says v'yesh loy limzoi kois chamishi, and to say on it halal hagadol. But the Rambam does not conclude with the words that you make a boiri pri hagafen and you drink it. Says the Rebbe, based on, as we know, the tremendous diuk, the precision in the words of the Rambam and how accurate he is with his words, it's understood that he actually means to be medayik. He's trying to tell us, because he doesn't say that you make a boiri pri hagafen and he doesn't say you drink it, he actually means that you don't drink this 5th cup. All you do is you pour it and you say halal hagadol on this cup. The Rebbe says this could also be understood from the previous words that the Rambam said. The Rambam said you pour the 4th cup and you finish halal on it, and you say boiri pri hagafen, and the Rambam says, and afterwards you don't taste anything all night long other than water. So it's clear that the Rambam wouldn't immediately afterwards say exactly the opposite, saying, yes, you could go ahead and drink another cup after the 4th cup. We just said you don't have anything after the 4th cup. So the Rebbe is learning that according to the Rambam, you're not going to drink this cup. How do we understand this? Says the Rebbe, we can explain it in the following way. Just by way of introduction, the Rebbe is going to explain whether Rab Tarfon is arguing with the other Tanoim in 2 different ways, and based on that, give 2 different explanations in the Rambam. So the first one, the Rebbe says, we can explain it that the Rambam learns like those opinions that explain that Rab Tarfon is actually arguing with the Tana in the Mishnah, which is whether you're obligated in 4 cups, which is the Tana of the Mishnah says, or you're obligated in 5 cups. Now, seemingly the halacha would be like the Tana Kama, and like the Tana in the Mishnah, and you're obligated only in 4 cups. However, we do find that the Gemara goes through a shakla v'tarya discussing the opinion of Rab Tarfon, exactly what you're supposed to say on this 5th cup. What is considered halal hagadol, from where you start halal hagadol, which makes it seem like that Rab Tarfon's opinion is accepted in halacha. So how do we act b'poyel mamish? What do we do? Now, seemingly, we would say that since you have a doubt, you could just be machmer, you could just be more strict, and follow Rab Tarfon and have another cup, have a 5th cup. The problem with this, however, is, according to the Chachamim, that you're only obligated in 4 cups, you're not allowed to drink a 5th cup. As the Rambam himself says, when he speaks about fulfilling the mitzvah of the 4 cups, he says, Einoi toim achar klum, you shouldn't be having anything afterwards at all besides for water. So we have this problem. Is the halacha of 4 cups, or are we taking into consideration this 5th cup? So the Rambam sort of makes this compromise. He paskins, he says, pour a 5th cup, but that's all he says, just pour it. You don't actually drink it. And therefore you'll have both ideas. On the one hand, you're only drinking 4 cups, but you're pouring a 5th cup to be yoitza also according to the opinion of Rab Tarfon. Now, you might say, what's the point of pouring a 5th cup, if you're not going to drink it? But the Rebbe says we do find a similar idea in halacha of pouring a cup and saying something over it and not drinking it. And the Rebbe gives the following example. If a person had a su'udah on Erev Shabbos, and it ended up stretching into Shabbos, according to some opinions, Birchas Hamazon you should say over a kois, although you're actually not going to drink that kos. You'll have some of it after Kiddush, but you're not drinking the kos after benching. So the Rebbe is applying the same idea now with the kosses of the night of Pesach. In other words, when we speak about the cups, generally there are two ideas. There's one thing, we need to drink the 4 cups. But there's also what the Chachamim were mesaken to say for each one of the 4 cups. And therefore the Rambam paskins that regarding this 5th cup, we pour the cup and you say Halal HaGadol on it, even though you're not going to drink it. So at least you're being Yoitzer, Rabbeinu Tam, at least in one aspect, that we're saying what we're supposed to be saying over the cup, although practically we're not going to drink it. So again, the Rebbe explained first the Rambam based on the idea that the Rambam is that Reb Tarfon is arguing with the opinions that say 4 cups, and Reb Tarfon holds he is supposed to have 5 cups. But now the Rebbe turns it the other way, and the Rebbe says that there's really another way of looking at it as well. That the Rambam learns like the Mefarshim, that Reb Tarfon is not arguing with the Tanakama. In other words, the mitzvah is to drink only 4 cups. So what is Reb Tarfon saying? According to this Girsa, Chamishi, the 5th cup, you say Halal HaGadol is, that's what Reb Tarfon says, is exactly the way we were just explaining that the Rambam is trying to make a compromise. Now we're learning that the Reb Tarfon himself, that's what he's saying. That all Reb Tarfon is saying is pour the 5th cup and say Halal HaGadol and don't drink it. And the Rebbe says that there's a reason for it. The 5th cup is different to the other 4 cups in the actual gather, in the actual idea of what the mitzvah is all about, and surely in the chefts of the mitzvah, the object of the mitzvah. The Rebbe explains. Regarding the 4 cups, the Gemara says, Arba kasi tiknu rabbanon derech cherus. The Chachamim were misaken 4 cups in a way of cherus, in a way of freedom. Each one we're going to do a specific mitzvah with it. And as the Rambam himself specifies earlier, each one of the 4 cups has a special bracha, you say a separate bracha for it, as we said. And each one of them we're going to do something special with it. The first case we're going to say Kiddush Hayoim. The second one we're going to say the Haggadah. The third one we're going to bench on. The fourth one we're going to say Halal on. And and you're going to make a bracha at the end of Halal. Birchas Hashir. This is the bracha of the Halalucha that we say at the end of Halal. In other words, even though one could say that according to the Rambam, and also according to the Rambam, each one of these 4 cups is considered cherus and a mitzvah for itself, as the Alter Rebbe's Lashon in Shulchan Aruch. Nevertheless, even though each cup is a separate mitzvah, they're still generally within the same gather. The same general mitzvah, they're all part of that same general idea, that number one, that all of them, all these 4, have the common denominator, they're all being drunk lecherus as a sign of freedom. Number 2, each one of them has a separate mitzvah that's being done with it, and with the saying a bracha on it. That's all the first 4 cups. Whereas the 5th cup is not in the same gather of the mitzvah of the Dalet Koises. This 5th cup is not going to be drunk. And also, what we're going to say over it is not the same kind of things, not in the same category as the other 4 cups. According to the Rambam, what we're going to say on the 5th cup, we actually don't finish off with a bracha. Whereas all the other 4 cups, each one of them has a bracha that we say before the Boyer Pri HaGofen. The Rebbe says, perhaps we could say that this Kois Chamishi, on which you're saying Halal HaGadol, which as we said before means from Hoidu La Hashem Ki Toiv all the way till Naris Bavel, the Rebbe is giving an idea of what this 5th cup is coming for. What are you coming to praise? Is praising for the actual Dalet Koisos that we had fulfilled the mitzvah. Or in a more general way, we're thanking and praising Hashem for all the mitzvahs, for all the things that we were Makayim on this particular night. And the Rebbe says, Vein Kamakoyme is not going furthermore into this point. Says the Rebbe, according to this, we can now understand the specific wording of the Rambam, where he says, V'yesh loy limzoi kois chamishi. We asked before, why doesn't he say mitzvah min ha-muvcha limzoi kois chamishi and the like? The expression mitzvah min ha-muvcha generally would show that this is somehow coming to add a certain perfection, a certain shleimus to the mitzvah that you were doing. Furthermore, it means not only that you're making it muvcha, you're making it better in the way you're performing the mitzvah, the person is performing the mitzvah, but the mitzvah min ha-muvcha means the object of the mitzvah itself is somehow becoming better, the object that you did the mitzvah with. The Rebbe gives an example from the Rambam's wording himself by Neiris Chanukah. So the we know that by Neiros Chanukah, the mitzvah is that every household should have one candle burning. The Rambam says, V'mahader is a mitzvah, and if you want to do that mitzvah better, then there's further ways of making the mitzvah more beautiful. And then V'mahader yoiser, if you go even more than that, and you want to do mitzvah min hamuvchar, so then we have the candle for each person on the first night, and moisav oilich you add every single night, etc. The hidur means that the way of performing the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah itself is being done in a better way. In the object of the Neiros Chanukah, again, the Rebbe says, as explained more in other places. So since, according to the Rambam, this Kais Chamishi is not in the same category at all of the other 4 cups, so you wouldn't be able to say that this 5th cup is mitzvah min hamuvchar, as if this is the best way of doing the Dalet Kais, to have a 5th one. It's a totally different inyan. And therefore, the Rambam says, V'yesh loy limzoi Kais Chamishi, you should pour a 5th cup. In other words, this is a separate obligation, a separate command. It's a different expression that we're using, V'yesh loy, and you should do this, but it's not coming to add to the previous ones. That's also, says the Rebbe, why the Rambam is elaborating in Meirich in his wording, and he says, it's not an obligation, like the 4 cups. In other words, he's emphasizing that this 5th cup is not the same kind of obligation as the other 4 cups. This is a totally different thing. V'yeshlei, this is what you should do, as mentioned before. The Rebbe now turns to another point related to this, but the Rebbe is now going to look at Kos Shel Eliyahu. So the Rebbe says, some people say that the reason we take the Kos Shel Eliyahu by the Seder is connected to this 5th cup that we were just speaking about. That is, since there is a machloikus in the Gemara, or at least one of the ways of explaining it that it's machloikus, whether we need to have a 5th cup or not, and sort of the halacha wasn't decided final, therefore, out of doubt, we pour the 5th cup, we don't drink it, we call it Kos Shel Eliyahu, indicating that when Eliyahu will come, and he will clarify all the doubts in halacha, so he's going to clarify this doubt as well, whether we're supposed to have this 5th cup. However, says the Rebbe, from the Chok Yaakov, and from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, it's quite clear that they're 2 separate ideas, this 5th cup that we were speaking about in Kos Shel Eliyahu. Because the Alter Rebbe brings in Shulchan Aruch the Pesach of the Ramah, that after the 4 Kaises, Noagu Kol Yisrael, all the Yidden are accustomed from the early generations not to drink wine, unless you really need it. For example, you're an istanis, someone's super sensitive, or he really has a strong desire to drink. And if you don't have anything else to drink but wine, we can allow him to drink a 5th cup and say Hallel HaGadol on it, and Nishmas, and Yishtabach all the way to the end. Now, in a previous simon, the one just before this, the Alter Rebbe says, from the Chok Yaakov, he says, V'noyagin b'medina Yisrael, in these countries, there's a custom to pour Kois echad, 1 cup, yoiser me'amesubin, more than the people around the table that are about to say this, so 1 extra cup, and we call it Kos Shel Eliyahu Hanovi. Says the Rebbe, from this we see that these are 2 completely separate things. To the extent, number 1, they say, and they are divided in 2 completely different simonim. Number 2, they have 2 different names. One is Kos Shel Eliyahu, one is this Kos Chamishi. In fact, they have different details, they have different dinim to each other. Because to drink that 5th cup, we are only allowing someone that really is desperate to have a drink, and then we tell him he needs to say Hallel HaGadol on it. Whereas Kos Shel Eliyahu, we're saying something else. It's a minhag in these medinas. It's not only that, yes, we have some sort of heter, we're allowing someone to have an extra cup. And finally, says that the biggest difference is Kos Shel Eliyahu is 1 cup more than the amount of people by the table, and it's connected to all the people together. This is not a cup for each individual, whereas the Kos Chamishi that we're allowing is to each individual that needs a extra cup of wine. So from the Alter Rebbe, it's clear that these are 2 separate things. And the Rebbe uses this now and says this in a similar way. From this we'll understand also in regards to the Rambam and his shita in Kos Chamishi, which holds that it's not only a heter or a reshus, optional, but we said v'yeshli means that he should be having a 5th cup. We should be pouring a 5th cup. But it's not a chiyuv of 1 kos that's going to be put down for all people together on the table, as is the case of Kos Shel Eliyahu. We're saying this is something else. This is a cup for each person that's fulfilling the 4 cups. Each person should have a 5th cup. As the Rambam says, Yesh loy limzoig. In other words, each person that's having a cup should now pour a fifth cup. It doesn't even just say simply, yesh limzog, a cup should be poured. This Kais Chamishi. So the Rebbe wants to explain now, but what is this idea, number one, of these two separate Kaises, a Kais Chamishi and a Kais Shel Eliyahu, that they're two separate ideas, both in content and in their dinim. And furthermore, the Rebbe wants to explain, again, that we find what seems to be opposites regarding these two ideas. In regarding to the Kais Chamishi, the Rambam Paskind, the Yesh Loi Limzoi Kais Chamishi, you should pour a fifth cup. Practically, however, we don't actually do this. In Shulchan Aruch, what's the halacha? This fifth cup is only a heter for someone that really needs it. So this is all in regards to Kais Chamishi. Now let's look at Kais Shel Eliyahu. Kais Shel Eliyahu is exactly the opposite. This is a cup that's not mentioned in the Gemara. It's not mentioned in the Rishonim, different to the Kais Chamishi that we said is mentioned by Reb Tarfon in the Gemara in the Beraisa. It's only the Acharonim mention it, and yet this Kais became, as opposed to the first thing that we said didn't become a minog, and yet Kais Shel Eliyahu became a minig b'chol tvutzis Yisrael, by all Yidden. How do we understand this? Says the Rebbe, the explanation is we find a certain common denominator in the two Kaises, in these two ideas, which, as we said, according to the Rambam at least, in both cases we don't drink it, we're only pouring it. Which this will tell us that they're both connected to a certain type of avodah or a certain madrega, a certain level that's higher than the person's actions. In other words, usually the cup we drink, but this somehow is beyond the person's regular avodah. Says the Rebbe, this is the inner pirush of what the Rambam says. The koise einoi choiva is not an obligation as the arba koises. In other words, we're trying to say is that this is connected to a level that's higher than choiva, higher than obligation. The Rebbe says it's known in Chassidus, the explanation on the words tfilas arvis rishus, that ma'ariv is rishus, it's optional. According to Chassidus, rishus, the fact that it's optional is actually representing that it's a higher level than that which you're obligated to do. So that's as far as the Kais Chamishi, it's representing a higher level, and so too in regard higher than Avodah, and so too in Kais Shel Eliyahu, which is connected to the union of the Geula, which is also completely higher than that which the person does, higher than the person's Avodah. So that's the general common denominator. Yet, says the Rebbe, there's a difference between them. The Kais Chamishi emphasizes that it's still somehow coming in continuation to the Avodah of the person, because you are calling it the fifth cup. 5 is coming after 4. Whereas Kais Shel Eliyahu is something completely separated. It's not coming as a fifth or as a continuation to the 4 cups, to the Avodah before it. What's the explanation? Says the Rebbe, that which comes in the fifth, through the fifth cup, again, not Kais Shel Eliyahu, but the fifth cup that the Rambam was talking about, comes specifically through the fact that first you had all of your avodah b'shleimus. You did all of your avodah perfectly. Now, after all of that, there's now a higher level being drawn down. That fifth darga coming from above. Similar to what Chassidus says in a lot of other places regarding the Isarusa de La'ela. Do you have any Isarusa de La'ela that arouses a person, an arousal from above that comes to arouse the person to do his avodah? Then there is that Isarusa Leila that comes as a result of what you have done. And then there's what the Rebbe refers to as the third Isarusa Leila, which comes after you have made yourself complete and everything that could have been drawn down as a result of your Avodah came. Now after you're perfect, now comes something higher that's completely beyond your Avodah. In a similar way over here, the fifth one is coming in continuation to your Avodah, but it's still completely beyond what you did. Says the Rebbe, this will explain to us why the Kais Chamishi is mentioned in the Gemara, the Gaonim, the Rambam. And in those times, there was this minhag that everyone, for himself and his personal avodah, should pour this fifth cup. Because what that means is, in their avodah, in their time, we know the concept that the earlier generations were compared to malachim, whereas our generation, we say, achshar dari, we say, is our generation worthy compared to those generations? So in other words, in their Seder, in their Dalet Kaisais, was on a much higher level, in a much more perfect way. And therefore, their Avodah was more of a Keli, to be able to now also accept this higher level, this fifth level, which is connected to the fifth cup. In other words, they did their Seder, their Avodah, in the most perfect way. And now, when they poured this fifth cup, they could draw down even this higher level. However, in our generations, Ikvus of the Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach, the footsteps of Mashiach, where the avodah is not so perfect that it should be a proper keli, a full space to be able to contain this higher level. So that's why it's not customary to have this fifth cup. That's all as far as the fifth cup is concerned. But now let's go to Kois Shel Eliyahu. Kois Shel Eliyahu is connected to the emunah of Yidden in Eliyahu coming, Mashiach coming. As understood from the continuation of the words of the Alter Rebbe there, where he speaks about the Anhaga, the conduct in regards to Kois Shel Eliyahu. So the Alter Rebbe says, in continuation to the beginning of the Sif, he says, in some places it's customary not to lock the doors that you sleep in on the night of Pesach, because it's Leil Shimurim, it's a special night where Hashem is watching all the Yidden for all generations. But Leil Shimurim also means a time when Hashem is guarding this night to take them out of Golus. So if Eliyahu is going to come and find, so that if Eliyahu comes, you should find the door open, and we should come out towards him quickly, and this is what we believe in, and this Emunah itself has a tremendous reward. Then the Alter Rebbe goes on about this idea, to have the Kois Shel Eliyahu, etc. Which from all of this it's understood that this is all very much connected and shaykh to the Emunah and the Geula HaSidah. Now this Emunah exists by all Yidden, every single Yid, Ma'aminim b'nei Ma'aminim. Despite whatever situation they are in their avodah, in their more revealed faculties. But always, every single Yid has, in an open way, or at least deep down inside, the emunah in Biyas HaMashiach. Not only believing in that Mashiach is coming, but waiting for Mashiach's coming. Which is a command from the Eibishter and Torah Shebeksav and Torah Sheba'al Peh. And furthermore, says the Rebbe, specifically, the later we are in the Nikvas of the Mashiach, the closer we are to the Gula, the more and stronger this is shining by the Yidden. Therefore, says the Rebbe, it's specifically in the later generations that it was Nizgala, that it was revealed and spread the minig of to pour this one extra cup more than the people sitting there. And we call it Kois Shel Eliyahu HaNavi, even though in the previous generations we don't find about this in an open way. And the Rebbe is now looking carefully at the words of the Alter Rebbe. It says, Kois Echad Yoiser Min HaMesubin. That it's Kois Echad and it's Yoiser from all of the Mesubin. What does that mean? So first of all, simply, of course, it means, again, it's one cup. As opposed to each person having, and it's one more than everybody there. But the Rebbe is mevayer the diak lashon of the Alter Rebbe limz a kois echad yoyser min HaMesubin, and it's called Kois Shel Eliyahu HaNavi. That the Alter Rebbe is coming to hint that Eliyahu HaNavi himself comes, and he becomes one of the people reclining, sitting there by the table of the Seder, because the emunah of the Yidden on this night, on the night when the Eibishter revealed him to him, the Yidden b'chvoidei va'atzmoi, and which comes b'goli b'gashmius. Here we have a cup and wine. That itself brings us ma'oder. It arouses that Eliyahu HaNavi should find himself by each and every Seder as Yoiser Mikol HaMesubin. In other words, there's all the people by the Seder, and there's one more, Eliyahu HaNavi is there as well. But at the same time, this kois is standing together on the same table with the koises of the other people as Echad Min HaMesubin, as one of the rest of the people by the Seder.